This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. My guest today is a man who needs no introduction. John Engler is a three-time governor of Michigan and a mastermind of Republican politics. If you remember Michigan being a stable state in your childhood, as I do, you can thank John Engler. If you've ever read the work of the Mackinac Center and they've pointed you toward the truth, you can thank John Engler. And so today we don't just get to talk about the man and revere the man, we get to talk to the man himself. John, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Very welcome, James. No, glad to be with you. Happy to chat.
John, you were notably young when you started off in politics. You were like Stevens T. Mason young. Now, as you approach 80, what are you up to these days? How do you spend your time?
Well, these days, mostly volunteer activities on several foundations or nonprofits. I work with the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal, which is a great cause. Russell's one of the great intellectuals in American history, one of the great author of The Conservative Mind, which probably in the 50s when that came out, 50s in the last century, was a seminal work in terms of helping to maybe underline a philosophical approach to government, which says, look, the values and the principles that this nation and Western civilization built upon are awfully important. The U.S. is an important experiment in democracy, and yet we need, as we think about change and improvement, you don't throw away. Prudence was one of Russell Kirk's great words, but you do things by preserving your traditions and your culture, and you make progress. It is not a French Revolution type of progress. He'd probably be a little bit maybe a lot dismayed today at what's going on in Washington. He would argue, I think, Kirk would, that change is necessary, that we'd move too far away from some of the values maybe that made this country what it has become, a beacon for everyone in the world. They want to be here, want to be part of us, but at the same time, you don't. Change coming so fast, so quickly can be pretty disruptive too. And he was above all else a gentleman too. I mean, so I think the coarseness of political discourse these days Kirk would find that appalling, and it is, well, not unprecedented. I mean, go back, it was pretty raucous in the early days.
It was way worse back in the old days. I mean, when you read some of the stuff, Dusky Sally, they were writing about Thomas Jefferson. I mean, they were hitting below the belt.
Absolutely. So, I mean, people don't have a stomach for that these days, nor necessarily should they have to have. But I mean,
Right.
it was brutal back then. And of course, one thing that probably made it tolerable is these were written in little newspapers, penny, almost sheets, if you will.
Right.
And it took a long time for those to circulate around the country. They didn't. It wasn't 24/7 coverage. It might take a couple of weeks for it to get from Philadelphia to New York, even maybe. And
the entire Revolutionary War, there was never a daily newspaper in America. I mean,
right.
that stuff took. It was really the Civil War. I mean, so that's 80 something years later it took to really get that machine running.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and when you're Lincoln having to get in your horse and buggy and ride out to, someplace in Virginia to meet your generals, this wasn't instantaneous communication, but they weren't using Snapchat either or any other signal as a communications tool those days. They went face to face. So, but anyway, that was back then. It was, and frankly, even I started the legislature back in the 70s. I mean, so it's changed a lot just in the time that I've been around.
Absolutely.
Because today you have so many, there weren't podcasts, obviously. They weren't around. I left office and there weren't podcasts. When I came into office, we put the first computer system in the governor's office. That's 1990.
In the 90s?
There was no internet.
Holy cow. So this was computers pre-internet.
Pretty much. I mean, it was, you were, you had, speaking of green screens, you had black screens with white letters. Kind of. It was very different. I mean, we saw a lot of change coming, but I tell people I'm pretty last century.
It's funny you mentioned that. You love history, it sounds like, as well. I think about once upon a time, George Washington, the general, the president, was called out of retirement by John Adams. They thought they needed an army against the French. Turns out they didn't need it. Last year, you and Governor Snyder had to come out of retirement a little bit to shepherd this effort to try to win back the House, restore some sanity to Lansing. Did you ever think you'd be called back into the action that way? And what's your read on how it got so far out of control? You left it in a good place, and then things spun out of control.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, uh, you know, attention to detail. I always thought it mattered, and if you don't over time keep your eye on the ball, you
Mm,
get behind. And I mean, this happens with lots of things. It happens with all kinds of organizations. Yes, it can happen with a political party. It can happen with a state. Um, and I think we did have things in pretty good shape, and we were seeing improvements in education. And now we've seen. Uh, I'm very distressed about our education performance. We were we were gaining, making progress, improving scores, and we've seen them go completely in the south, and we're
yeah,
now in the bottom. That's not the decile, certainly the bottom. We're clearly in the bottom quarter, but I mean, in some rankings, reading, I mean, we're down in the 40s. I
bottom
mean, that's
10
just not
state.
where and we're seeing states like Mississippi having now they maybe haven't caught us yet, but their rate of progress is
Right,
3-4 times ours, and
right.
that shouldn't be the case. So it is frustrating, and we've never actually spent more and achieved less than we're doing today.
Mm. And so that's as a state. Then you look at what happened, to the party
Yeah,
2022. I think about that catastrophe. And so I hear this literally every single day on Twitter when I talk to Republican voters. Um, the Michigan Republican voter is a lot more affected by what happened in 2022,
yes,
and they identify with the loss that year more than the win of last year. And so when I look at that ballot in totality, and I'll admit I was gone in 2022. They had us in the waiting room for Let It Rip, and thank God I never made the air because I, honest to God, thought Tudor Dixon was going to win because I took my personal feelings, and thought that extrapolated. It didn't.
yeah. Well, 2022 was a very tough election. I didn't know Tudor before she ran. Uh, got to know her, when she emerged from the primary and tried to help her in the fall. A lot of things converged that year. You had um, redistricting for legislative districts, so it was
Mm-hmm.
different. Uh, Probably most importantly, though, was the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade and uh, resulted then in states like Michigan having ballot proposals. Uh, in Michigan, the ballot proposal was marketed as though a restoration of Roe v. Wade. Obviously, it went much, much beyond that.
Oh yeah,
It's
limitless.
as broad and sweeping as any state in the country in terms of legalizing abortion and prohibiting perhaps legislative uh, action. Whether that's I mean, even on partial or late term abortion or uh, babies born alive. All
Yeah,
this stuff comes into play.
yeah.
Parental involvement with minor children. This. So it was a pretty radical proposal, but the millions of dollars behind that proposal and the campaign saying, well, all we're doing is reinstating Roe v. Wade. Well, that that was allowed to stand. There wasn't enough money coming from anywhere to even have a
No,
debate, and frankly, there was nobody interested in having a debate. And
no.
then Tudor got caught, I think, in um, there was a statement she'd made in almost in one of the Tim Skubic kind of got you kind of questions, and that there must have been $10 million of ads spent repeating that
Oh,
phrase.
that was my boy Charlie LaDuff. He asked her that abortion question. She goes, "No limits." Next thing you know, Charlie's like fighting the Democrats because they're using his face in ads all fall and winter long.
Yeah, so there was that question, the redistricting, and then the resource question. What people, I think Republicans actually, I'll start with the party, failed to realize is how successful uh, the Democrat fundraising has become nationally. I mean, they're
Mm.
dramatically outspending Republicans in most every contested race. Trump being well, actually, I would say being the exception, but not really, because even Harris coming into the race late
Had more
raised,
money.
raised more money. Yeah, didn't spend it well and had, I would say, no message. So it didn't matter. The public wanted to change, but in 2022 that wasn't the case, and so and Tudor really outperformed. I mean, one of the reasons I've thought that I think Gretchen Whitmer's future is pretty limited. If you look at the two debates, the Tudor Dixon versus Gretchen Whitmer debate,
Yes.
almost nobody saw them, but Dixon outperformed Whitmer in both debates. Uh, the first one was a regional broadcast in West Michigan. The second one was 6 days before the election or 7 days before the election, when I
By
think
which people
over a
have been
million people
voting
had
for
voted.
a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so and then the loss turned out to be so narrow. The House campaigns were hurt because in the backdrop there was a contest. People were fighting about who's going to be the speaker, and the caution I would always have to legislators and the people who are candidates for the legislature: look, you better make sure you've got a majority before you figure out who's going to be running the show. Well, guess what? They fell short. 56-54 Democrat majority in the House, and I was the last minority leader for the Republicans in the Senate back in the 80s. And so there'd been a Republican Senate for 40 years. And
Right.
that suddenly was lost, and that's a 2018 Democrat majority. And with a one vote majority in the House and in the Senate, uh, you, you know, Governor Whitmer acted like she had a super majority, and they just ran roughshod over what had been 30, 40 years of work
At
that I
least
think
that first year.
yeah, it was terrible. I mean,
I mean, they were literally going around saying, "What did Republicans like? What did they hold up as their success stories? Let's eliminate those."
pretty
And I
much.
think about right to work, right? And that was because she has that cellular memory of I was in the room when Snyder did it, and I have all these negative feelings harbored toward it. And so then they repeal it, 10 years after it becomes the law. I see right to work though as an opportunity in 2026 if someone's willing to say, not that we're going to bring back what you had, but we need to modernize it. I just did a story about this dentist in West Michigan renounced his license rather than take implicit bias training. You had other cases where people were forced to take jabs to keep their jobs or get a job. What would you think about a modernized form of right to work where we're going to protect the interest, like almost like a worker bill of rights, right? You don't have to be a union member, you don't have to get a jab, and you don't have to subscribe to an ideology.
Oh, I think James, I think I think that's where society is. I mean, nobody
Mm.
wants to be compelled to be part of anything these days. And your point's a good one. I think it'll come back because I do think it it hurts jobs. When I was governor, we couldn't get, say, a Japanese company to even consider building in Michigan at the time if it was an automotive, you know, supplier or certainly an assembly plant. I mean, they were wanting to be in the southeast of the country and
Hmm.
in right to work states. I mean, there was a non-starter to have that conversation, and Governor Snyder, I mean, ended up being able to have enough of a majority that they were able to get this done. And I think you mentioned the fact that both Rick and I were tried to play a role in 2024. We were so disappointed in the loss of the legislature that we thought it was important to try to help the House recapture the majority. And
Yeah.
Michigan actually, distinctively among all states, in 2024 was the only state to capture a legislative chamber
Only
and switch
one.
it from Democrat to Republican. So
Yeah.
that was a pretty remarkable achievement. There were a lot of people involved. I mean, I would say Governor Slater did a lot more than I did, but more importantly, I mean, there were private citizens, West Michigan, East Michigan, Southeast Michigan, uh, along
Bill
the
G.
border. I
Schuette in
mean,
the
everybody was
legislature.
set up, and so there was
Yeah.
tremendous support. And in 24, what you had is much more effective candidate recruitment. You
Mm.
had a strong focus on winning elections, and frankly, you had a Democrat record that was vulnerable. So some of these people, and they'll lose more seats in 26. I think they'll take the Senate back in 26, uh, and that's one of the reasons that, embarrassingly, Governor Whitmer hasn't called the special election in the open Senate seat up in Saginaw Bay in Midland County. It's now, we're taping this. It's early May, so this seat has been vacant in effect since the senator was elected to Congress in November of last year, and the governor doesn't want to call the election because she doesn't want her policies put to a voter test. They're
Hmm.
going to lose, I think. I think Republicans got good candidates, but more importantly, they got a good set of issues. You've got um, the governor just, you know, thinking, well, I'm the governor. I get to call the election. If I don't call it, nobody can make me. And she's right. You can't make her call it.
No,
You would think there would be
constitutionally.
enough pressure and
Yes.
irritation. I mean, but
Yes.
and and it is surprising that Democrats in the legislature are willing to buy in on this strategy of, look, the best way to win is to not have an election.
It seems like even that consensus is fracturing, where even Democrat aligned groups are saying you got to
Yeah,
call the
defend it.
election. I mean, it's just
Yeah, defend it. I mean,
you have
to
to worry about how things look. You can't not.
well, I think the public gets this. I mean, they understand the fear that, I guess, the governor has, and frankly, they understand how badly some of the policies have worked out. I think Michigan still now has among the highest of the unemployment rates among the states. So we've seen that. We know we've lost population. We lost another congressional seat. One thing that Rick Snyder and I both, are happy to show is the graph that when both of us during our time as governor, we saw population increases. Immediately after we leave, we see population decreases in the state. It's almost, the public. I used to say that there was more common sense in the coffee shops across Michigan and then the committee rooms in Lansing. And the people get this. I mean, they understand. Uh, I mean, the way COVID was handled. I mean, there was no price to be paid for that. Politically, you can't imagine. We were one of the worst states in the country, and our country was one of the worst among all nations in the shutdowns. But here we are as a nation, doing things that many did not. Then among the 50 states, our approach was among the worst of the 50 states. And um, people say, well, it doesn't matter now. It's in the rearview mirror, but it will matter if somebody tries, like the governor tries to run nationally. You can't defend and
Bingo.
explain this stuff.
You can't outrun your record, but the only way she wins and is let off the hook is if we stop talking about it. I think in 2022, and I think that's part of what creates that wounded psychology of 2022 is that it felt like if this were a movie, that's when the bad guy would get their comeuppance. But
Yeah.
when I look at the totality of that ballot, you have a trio, the pink trio from 2018, Whitmer, Nessel, Benson. Then you have three ballot initiatives designed to drive Democrat turnout. There was 6 reasons for a Democrat to show up to vote. There was one reason for a Republican to show up to vote, and that was anti-Whitmer.
Yeah.
And that's just not enough people.
Yeah. And I would, the other thing that the party apparatus had really collapsed. I mean, they had
Mm.
there were a lot of new people that were attracted to become involved because they were supporters of President Trump, but they weren't people that were interested in necessarily building anything beyond supporting President Trump. I mean,
Right.
they didn't come to this with the idea, what can we do in our county, in our part of the, in our city to develop more support to explain some of these issues. I mean, they they had a perception that everything was this national kind of
Yes.
Trump set of issues, and
Mm.
that's not enough. Legislative, I mean, it's if you're running for governor, you're running to hold a seat in the state legislature. Uh, you ought to be dealing with people's problems that they deal with, confront every day. How long does it take? How long do I have to wait in line to get a driver's license renewed, or if I want to
Right.
change my registration on my car, if I want to get a permit to do something from a state agency,
Mm.
or if I've been the victim of malpractice, how, is there going to be a hearing on that dentist or doctor that, how long does this stuff take? How does government work? The unemployment office is a good example. I mean, I mean, the numbers apparently 7-8 billion dollars sort of disappear, and nobody cares about that. State workers still aren't back to work. I mean,
No.
there's some wonderful good news about new investments in downtown Lansing and some, housing being built and this and that. But in the article, they just matter of factly say, well, Lansing has suffered because these workers have never come back. And, well, wait a minute. The COVID's been over for quite a while. What do you mean they haven't come back? Well, that's just, we don't work from an office anymore. That stuff is kind of crazy. And I think people, when this is explained to an average voter out there,
Right.
they say, well, that's not right. I'm paying for this, and I'm not getting what I am paying for.
Yeah, I think about 2026, and for me, I call it the ultimate battle for Michigan, but to me, it's also a loser leaves town match. I'm in my young 40s. I'm at the point in life where things need to either continue on a stable path or you got to find the thing that works, right? And so to me, either the 10 million of Michigan save our state or it won't be saved. If there's a scenario where a Democrat runs this state for 16 years, there won't be a year 17. And so to inspire people, I tell them, hey, Stevens T. Mason's not walking through that door. John Engler's not walking through that door. But is he? Is John Engler walking through that door? What's going to be your involvement in 2026?
Well, I'll certainly help our nominees. I mean, this is you're making an important point for your listeners here. The historic election in 26 is this: we've not had in modern times ever an open United States Senate seat and open governor seat at the same time in the same election.
Yeah.
Add to that that there's going to be a new attorney general, a new secretary of state, that you've got a very competitive, fight for control of the House and the Senate. I think the Republicans could add to their numbers in the House, and I sure think they can take the Senate back. So, uh, and then you say, well, what else? Is there anything else? Yeah, as a matter of fact, there is. Congressional seats. John James has announced he's going to run for governor. So that's a seat that's been pretty hotly contested. That's there. You've got the seat that was won by McDonald Rivet, that is that
Yes.
Saginaw area seat, and that's pretty competitive as well. You've got Congresswoman Stevens, who's going to run for the U.S. Senate. So that's opening up another seat that uh, has been competitive, could be maybe again. And then throw one more thing in. You've got Supreme Court seats. The Supreme Court in the 90s and 2000s was the strongest, I would argue, most talented Supreme Court we have in the nation.
Mm.
We were getting all kinds of um, attaboys, kind of congratulations. It was a court that people were looking to see their opinions, the jurisprudence coming out of the court when it was Bob Young and Cliff Taylor and Maura Corrigan,
Right.
Steve Markman was truly impressive. Today, it's the weakest Supreme Court in my political in my lifetime, and
Mm.
it has. We saw when you have a rule of law court, when the court follows the law, not views itself as a sort of second chance legislative body, what
Right.
happens is that lawyers, doesn't make a difference, are liberal or conservative lawyers, if they read the law and the plain English says, no, you can't do that, or yes, you need to do this, the court's going to follow that.
Right.
But when you get away from that, you end up almost with a lottery type situation. You might as well file a lawsuit because you might be able to talk them into giving you the outcome you desire, regardless of what the statute says. And we just saw that, on a case, whether you think that a minor, a 17, 18-year-old commits an adult crime, should be treated as an adult, regardless of what you think. The law has been pretty clear on that, but the court found a way to say, well, no, you can't send somebody who's 17 years and 11 months old to prison for life, even if they brutally killed 3 people. That's no longer permissible. That didn't get changed by the legislature reacting to people saying
Right.
this is unfair or harsh.
Right.
The court just made it up. That's not the court's job. They're not the legislative body. They're supposed to follow the law. And in this case, they said, well, the law doesn't matter because we found a constitutional basis to set this aside. That kind of stuff is, it's a little bit like you're seeing some of these federal judges try to do at the
Yes.
federal level. Is they're inserting their view in lieu of and separation of powers matters. I've served in 2 of the 3 branches, and I used to argue as a legislator, and I did certainly as a governor and chief executive, that the powers of the branches of the 3 branches are pretty clearly delineated in our Constitution. And there should be, if you're in the legislative branch or the executive branch, a robust exercise of those authorities and powers. And I follow that motto, and I think that's right. We had an interesting thing dealing with legislative power, and there I would say the judiciary actually got it right. They resisted the temptation so far. The previous legislature ended in 24. Failed to present some bills to the governor. Well, that's a failure of, at that time, it was Speaker Joe Tate and whoever was the staff in the House of Representatives. They didn't send the governor. Well, fast forward, it's now January of 25. It's a brand new legislature, brand new speaker. And they're saying, well, these bills are there. And the reaction of the House is, so?
Right.
Not our problem.
Not our problem.
You should have sent them on, but we don't, we can't send them. We could, but we're not going to. We don't think that's appropriate. That was the old legislature. You didn't finish your work, but as a result, those bills don't pass. They're not signed.
And even the court was like, they could, but I can't make them do it. So it's a moot point, essentially.
And it'll be interesting to see if the Supreme Court, if this is appealed, we got the kind of Supreme Court that would, almost find it hard to resist the temptation to meddle over there. But the Constitution is very clear that the legislative bodies are in charge of their own rules. It's not that the court is in charge of the rules, or the court is the interpreter of the rules. No, it's a power of the legislature.
I don't think the judges and the justices understand the moment right now. There's this scene in Freedom where Chief Justice Taney tries to hold off the Civil War with a series of rulings, and Lincoln just, invokes habeas corpus, won't even bring the body of the defendant into the courtroom. And Taney was quickly reduced to saying, I can only call on no one wants to see that happen again. Because if that happens again, we do not have 3 branches of government anymore. We just have 2. And if the court's not viewed as legitimate, it won't be treated as legitimate. Let me ask you about
this. That's always the criticism of Roe v. Wade, by the way.
Yes,
because
they're citing international law and all these. They didn't cite the U.S. Constitution.
No, they made it up. There were states that were liberalizing abortion laws at the time. There were in America 50 different approaches. And people say, well, gee, we think it ought to be the same. Well, I mean, we have a federalist system, and the 50 states have the authority except what's been delegated. And
Mm-hmm.
guess what? We didn't delegate everything to Washington, and we sure didn't delegate things that had never been decided. And this was, and these are the kinds of questions that, I mean, that's why we have state legislatures. That's why they're important.
Right.
Who serves, and states are, as they've been described, great laboratories of democracy.
Yes.
And it's the debate right now in Medicaid, in the brand new budget that's going to get passed at some point. Um, we, in the 1990s, had tremendous success. We actually changed the name of the Social Services Agency, the old name. We created what was called the Family Independence Agency,
Mm.
because the view was that, look, for all kinds of reasons, people uh, end up in poverty, end up without resources, and as a society, we're going to help. But the idea is to try to help somebody get back on their feet, get back into the economic mainstream, get started, get on the ladder so you can start climbing, not
Mm-hmm.
that you're in a permanent state of dependency where uh, your advancement depends on some appropriation that might
Right.
come from Washington or Lansing or whatever
Right.
state capital might be impacting you. And we saw uh, the benefits of that uh, in Michigan, and we were pretty competitive with Wisconsin. Tommy Thompson was governor over there, and we kept trying to outdo each other. But we both states had a lot of success in helping some families get back into the economic mainstream. And guess what? Work always pays more than not working.
Yes. And that is another thing that they really changed during the pandemic. You talk about the Great Reset. How about you can make more money or just as much money staying home, being paid to not work? And so, what does that do to me as a business owner? It
Sure.
spoils my pool of candidates because you have people making more money than they'd ever made not working.
And exactly. And we have to look at who, because the other thing that we did in 91, this is back when I first became governor, we were facing pretty significant financial problem. We looked around, we said, 35 states don't have programs where they send money to single able-bodied adults without children,
Mm,
because what we were sending wasn't a lot of money. It was many millions of dollars, but it wasn't compared to even working at a minimum wage job, X number of hours per week.
right.
We said, look, we need to get you back into the workforce. Today, there's something like 7.2 million American men that are out of the workforce and not working and not looking to go into the workforce. And there's 7.8, nearly 8 million jobs unfilled. So this disconnect, but the incentives, uh, we've done so much for some of these single men that in terms of Medicaid benefits, that's come at the expense of women with children who are in poverty, who have profound needs. They should get the resources, not maybe
And
the
it's fascinating because what you just described is we keep hearing about the jobs Americans won't do. This is why. Because you are so feather bedded with our resources that you don't feel the need to work, as opposed to having that junkyard dog mentality of what do I need to do to feed my family? Because the book says if you don't work, you don't eat.
Mike Rowe, who does the America's Dirty Jobs show and has been a
Yeah.
great advocate for uh, skills training and what he calls the dirty jobs. They're not that dirty, but many of them aren't. Some of them sure are. But his point is that if you've got skills today, the demand is astounding for you, but you got to get some skills. Where there's no future is sort of the dropout who just sort of leaves and 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 prepares for nothing. And we've got all kinds of programs. Everybody's bending over backward trying to create programs.
Mm,
Even I would say governors of across the political spectrum. Even Governor Whitmer's tried to do some of this. I don't necessarily think they've done it well, or they haven't been very successful at it. But state after state after state is working on this. But your point, James, that you just made is so profound. I mean, if the what's the hurdle that you have to get over to make work pay?
Right.
And if it's so high, it's very hard to get somebody out of their parents' basement or out of that, apartment or wherever. As Mike Rose said, they've one thing we know about these people. He was asked a question, and somebody said, "Well, I think we wish we knew more about them." He said, "We know a lot." He
Mm-hmm.
said, they're
Mm-hmm.
averaging a couple thousand hours a year on their screens. So what are they doing? They're surfing, gaming. They're just
And what they're not doing is building a future.
that's right, and they're not. Yes,
And so, like, to me, that's the real threat of our education system. I graduated high school 2002. I got an education. From what I can tell, a lot of kids now are getting a re-education.
yeah,
You're told what to think, what to not think, and given the answer so as to recite it, not let's get your brain activated so you could think it through. Um, John, I use a lot of time on this podcast and when I give speeches, trying to make a warning to Republicans for 2026. One, you can't expect that history singularly will carry you across the 8-year trend of switching parties.
right,
That won't do it for you. But my second warning is a lot of people think that the world began in June 2015 when Donald Trump took the escalator ride. And
yeah,
I get that Trump is exceptional. I get that this man wiped out dynasties in both parties to stand where he is right now. But what you can't do is take a man who's done that and set him as the floor against which you judge your neighbor who's willing to risk it all and run for governor. Can you help us? Can you give a pep talk about how Michigan Republicans can approach life after Trump?
sure. Well, uh, you also, I think, don't default to Donald Trump is many things, but he certainly. I mean, I wouldn't suggest he's all knowing and all powerful that he should select every candidate to win every race, and his endorsement should be the
Yeah,
be all and the end all. In fact, he's 0 for 2 in endorsing state party chairs in Michigan.
right.
Um, and this time, I think by the election of Senator Jim Runstead as the party chair, what's happened in Michigan is there was a recognition on the part of delegates. Look, we need to get back to more normal behavior. We need to stop worrying less about is this person the right kind of Republican, and
Mm,
get back to winning elections in November. I always just say it doesn't matter if you win an August primary. It
right.
matters if you win a November general election. And we've
Yes.
had too many people trying to say, well, I disagree with him or her on this or that, so or I'm more, they're not as worthy as I am. You know, knock
Absolutely.
that stuff off. I mean,
Everybody's a rhino.
yeah,
Everybody's weak. Everybody's on bended knee except you, who is an anon on Twitter, who doesn't even use their real name.
yeah.
It is a real problem. And what's your read
No,
on
so
how
so
we
the
got to
so
that
so
place?
the advice is this: look, you're free to run the primary if you want.
Yes.
I beat incumbents to get elected to the House of Representatives. I beat
Hmm.
another incumbent to stay in the House. I beat an incumbent to get elected to the state Senate, and they were all Republicans, so those are primaries. But then I beat an incumbent Democrat to get elected governor. So I've
Yes.
4 incumbents over my years, and I won 10 elections without ever losing one. But the key is, uh, when you win a primary, you've got to bring people together, because the primary is just the first step. And it isn't, if my person doesn't win the primary, then I don't pick up my toys and go home and say, well, I'm
Right.
out. No, you have to. And there was some of that hurt Mike Rogers a little bit, because he found himself, I think, in a race that he almost won. Mike Rogers got a higher proportion of Donald Trump's vote in Michigan than any of these other candidates who won. The McCormick in
Mm.
Pennsylvania, Moreno in Ohio, Sheehy out in Montana. I mean, Rogers did very, very well. It's that Trump's margin wasn't quite big enough in Michigan to bring Mike along,
Right.
but uh, he suffered. He had people who didn't like Trump. They were never Trumpers who said, "Well, Mike Rogers, you're too close to Donald Trump. I can't support you." Then he had people who were absolutely adoring Donald Trump,
And
who
think he's not
worship
Trump
him, and
enough.
he's not. Yeah, you don't love him
Even
as
with
much as
Trump's
I do. I
endorsement.
can't support you. Well, he only lost by 19,000 votes. So that alone, had the resources that came in late October been there in late September, he would have won. Had the party been stronger, there's all these but for. And
Right.
Mike's going to run again. I think Mike will win. And he's Senator Thune, the new leader, is supporting him. He's got tremendous support. I think that will be good. That should be encouraging. That's part of my encouragement for 26, that this is really, really important. And we need uh, people like Mike who understand the automotive industry in the Senate, and we need them
Mm.
talking about the impact of tariffs and some of the policy. I'm hopeful that's going to get sorted out sooner, much sooner than later. But so there's that. In the governor's race, a crowded primary, but on both sides. So both sides are going to be fighting it out. You've got some pretty, and you've got also this interesting first time ever serious independent candidacy in Mike Duggan running,
Yes.
along with Benson, who will win the Democrat nomination. She'll crush Gilchrist. I have no idea why he's not running for the Senate, because it would have been a pretty easy path for him, it seems to be,
They need some
especially against,
testosterone in that Senate race.
yeah. And the Democratic leaders of the African American committee are bemoaning the fact that there's no candidate, uh, at least at this point, who's been successful. So the only African American in the Congress is John James, and then Democrat leaders' minds, he's not black. I guess it's weird, but
Right. Oh
it's
yeah.
just I scratch my head there and say, what the heck? But I think it's an opportunity, and so for Republicans, the idea is quality candidates. This is not; these aren't medals that get handed out. These aren't high school elections and popularity contests about who should be the class president because we like her or we like him more. They're they really are fun to be with. No, who are the people that can do the jobs? Who will have an agenda and uh, demonstrate the ability to follow through on that once elected? And those are the people we should be nominating. If we work hard in the primary and then understand once the primary is over, we're all united in November.
Right.
That alone will enhance our chances of success greatly. I do think in 26 that the 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 Democratic Party, and there's some interesting signs. Just we're doing this podcast on a Monday morning, but the week prior in Washington, there was a vote on overturning some of these old Obama and Biden regulations that gave California domination of the
Right.
automotive industry.
Which has
I
cost
think
us jobs already in Michigan.
absolutely no, and we have fought this before, um, and finally, Congress looks like they're going to stand up to the California Air Board and say, no,
Mm.
we're going to have a national standard. This is, we're the Trump administration is negotiating all these countries to remove non-tariff barriers, but here we are in America setting
Right.
our own barriers. We got 50 states. We need one standard in America because we're going to compete. You can't, at least for
Federalism demands it. That's
yeah,
full faith and credit. I need to
35. I
know.
think 35 Democrats, including I think 3 Democrat members of Congress from Michigan, actually voted to tell California to stand down, make them stand, and that is a very good sign because it's sort of like you know sort of Trump in this case. Some of his policy prescriptions are getting through, and they're getting bipartisan support. Uh, we just have to do a lot more, and And we probably need leaders who can go to Washington, don't have to cover their face when they're in a meeting with the president, you know. So,
John, when you're picking a candidate, and when we pick a candidate, do you want the best politician or the person who would be the best at the job if elected?
well, that's a really good question, and you're correct. There are some distinctions there, um, in terms of. Uh, I mean, I I always enjoyed policy, but I understood I had to win the election if I was going to have a chance to work on the policy that I
Right.
wanted to do. Uh, I mean, Trump clearly is a guy who I think, initially just because of his uh, name, his presence on television, he was a personality larger than life, and he had a way. I mean, what he did back go all the way back to 2016, or as you pointed out, 2015 when he came down the elevator, or escalator. But I mean, he diminished his opponents. He destroyed them, and they all and they were all worried. If you go back to that period, the other worry they had, oh, I don't know if I can say anything about Trump because he might run as an independent, and he'll spoil my chances. There was
Mm.
that in the back of everybody's mind back in that day. So they sort of were a little bit kid gloves on him, and I think you've got to, uh, you better have debates. I'm a big proponent, and I'll tell you something I think is important right now is that we need in the media to get, uh, for the Senate race and the governor's race and some of these congressional races, we need debates in August and we need
Mm.
debates in September before people start voting, not debates at the end of October. The little game
Yes.
that's been played by Democrats of late is try to push them off, push them off, push them off. And we need to get them set now and just tell whoever wins, you're nobody, nobody running can say, well, I'm already booked on August 23rd. I can't do a debate on that day.
Be ready to debate.
That's the date. You need to be there. If you're not, the opponent's going to have the entire forum for themselves, and
Mm.
these need to be statewide. And I mean, I'd let if we want to, we're worried about who the moderators are. Let each candidate pick one. Let's have you know, let's not try to let's make sure that I've got somebody I think is going to be fair, and let the other side pick somebody they think is going to be fair, and let's have at it. Let's really have a conversation because the issues are serious. And in Michigan, they're especially serious because uh, of the damage that's been done by the Whitmer administration, I think, on policy and
Mm.
the competitive uh, nature of some of these other states. I mean, they're coming after our jobs
Yeah.
and and an industry, an automotive industry, which is uh, regardless of what anybody uh, might personally favor, there's no question there's going to be more electric vehicles in the future than there are today. That's there's that is happening. That's a
Right.
transition. May not happen as fast as some think, but uh, that that can change where they get built and what kind of supply chain is there. Those are all different. We have an issue about how much power do we have in Michigan. We were proud that we had extra power. We use that as a way to attract businesses. Now,
Now we're at the brink.
yeah, we're being told. I mean, last summer in West Michigan, we were in the Grand Haven area in the summer. I'm hearing from Consumers Power saying, well, you really need to be careful because if you can reduce your energy usage, you might avoid having brownouts or, you know, loss of power in the summer. Well, why on earth is that an issue now?
Right.
Because we've run our reserves down and we've closed so many plants.
It's a man-made
Yeah,
circumstance, and
yeah,
and the idea that our state, our beautiful state in 2040 is going to run on solar panels and windmills.
not going to happen.
Are you serious? And that's going to carry the base load? We're going to go from rolling blackouts like you were talking about to rolling whiteouts. Today you do have power.
Well, again, not to put too much on this, but if anybody was looking at just what happened in Spain, where they were bragging about they'd gone to 100%. We'd reached 100% renewable. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, something happens in their grid. They don't have baseload power generation. Everything goes down, and they're out of power. Much of Spain is out of power for days, and I don't know if it's still been restored. But I had friends who
Not
were over there.
by not by the conditions of life, because of the choices of politicians. And this is why we say that elections matter. This is why elections matter, because they get to pick the bureaucrats.
It's true. It's true.
You mentioned it, the Mike Duggan effect. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and specifically how the Michigan Democrat Party became the party of girl bosses. And so I did a little bit of deep dive into history. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So I actually traced this back to the 1994 governor's election. So Debbie Stabenow became a legend in politics, but at the time she loses the primary. Howard Wolpe wins. Stabenow writes shotgun on a loss. And so you look at
Right, Wolpe on that ticket in '94. She
yeah,
was running mate.
yeah, and I think that was a lesson for Gretchen Whitmer 2 decades later, when she says 2014, Mark Showers going up against an incumbent governor. Do I want to join him on that ride? Says no. And then you saw she just did the same thing again last year with Harris. And so Stabenow's loss became a learning lesson for all the Democrats. Then I look. No, I'm sorry.
And it did. It did. The other thing that changed in there, um, Nessel wasn't the old Democrat establishment candidate to be the attorney general. That was a U.S. Attorney Miles, I think it was his name, over in
Yeah,
Grand
Pat
Rapids.
Miles.
Yeah, Pat Miles. He got beat in the convention by Nessel, and he was beaten by a combination of forces that just say that would be pretty hostile to Mike Duggan. That's
Yes.
that's the part of the party
Yes.
that Mike Duggan says they left me. I didn't leave them; they left me, and
Mm.
and that's the George Soros, Eric Holder kind of wing that's very much on the ascent. I mean, that's those would be the people that, for some reason, think it's okay for boys to compete against girls in sports, to be in locker rooms with young
Mm-hmm.
women. I mean, that kind of nonsense. I mean, it's just they've got some pretty extreme views out there, and they're not in the mainstream, but they may be in a controlling position in the Democratic Party, to the point where I think the Duggan decision was real practical. He couldn't beat Benson in primary.
Mm.
I mean, I mean, if
And right now, as I watch Benson stumble so badly out of the gate, where her performance as Secretary of State is affecting her candidacy, and I see someone with few abilities, I see someone who's never gone through a primary, because those are convention races too.
that's correct,
I see a pretty face and very little else to back it. And at this point, I wonder. I keep hearing that Mike Duggan is this great political whiz. Why did he think Benson was so powerful?
money. She will have. Uh, she's into that network
Mm.
that will fund her to. I mean, just almost unprecedented levels. I mean, Whitmer has raised a lot of national money, but for
Yeah.
progressive women today, I mean, there's a big pot of gold out there. It seems to me. I think you're going to see some of that maybe with McMorrow in the Senate primary against Stevens. I mean, I think Stevens is pretty far left, but McMorrow is much further left, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore
Mm-hmm.
uh, she's going to tap into that vein of, you know, East Coast, West Coast progressive money. I mean, and I
Right.
think that's the same money that Benson gets. So I
Mm.
think, um, you know, I'm a little bit too removed from, so I'm not as current on all of the the funding sources, but I have watched in amazement really at uh, how much money uh, this is it Code Blue or whatever they're
Act Blue.
Act Blue, what they're able to generate. You saw that. Well,
Mm.
actually, wasn't it Jamie Harrison against Lindsey Graham? I didn't think he had a chance of winning that race, but he was
Right.
he was drawing in tens of millions of dollars in you know each quarter, in that election, way outspent Graham. And
Mm.
and where does that come from? I mean, they've got a pretty good money machine out there, and I
And
think there's
McMorrow
also
was
dark money
notably
in there too.
worried when they mentioned the Act Blue investigation. She, in particular, was like, "Whoa," which tells me that maybe his sniffer is working. And so then I look at 1990 till now, right?
Okay.
When Democrats have fielded a white male candidate, Jim Blanchard in 90, Wolpe in 94, Feiger in 98, Verge Bernero 2010, Mark Schauer 2014, they've lost. When they fielded a woman, Granholm in 02, Granholm in 06, Whitmer in 2018, 2022. When they run a woman, they win. When they field a white guy, they lose. I feel like the Democrats have become no party for white men.
Uh, that's a good, interesting observation. It may well be the case. I mean, um, I blame the Republicans for Granholm. I mean, you know, you know, she shouldn't have been Attorney General in '98. But we nominated instead of nominating Scott Romney, we nominated John Smetanka and handed her the race.
Mm,
Uh, Romney lost that convention fight by about 90, maybe 80 to 90 votes. If Romney had been the nominee, he was my candidate, but I was sort of on the way out by '98. It's the third term.
right.
Uh, Convention uh, went a different way. This is a good example of where, well, John's a really nice guy. He ran 4 years ago. You support him 4 years ago. I said, yes, I did, but
Right.
he didn't win, and
He didn't
proved
win.
not to be a very, he proved not to be a very good candidate. Uh, Romney would have been a very interesting, strong candidate, I think, and would have. I'm pretty certain would have won that race. Granholm never becomes attorney general, but never becomes governor, and more importantly, maybe never becomes energy secretary for the
That's
nation.
incredible. That is a butterfly flaps its wings scenario. I'd like to ask you about another one. Let's say it had been Debbie Stabenow you faced in 1994. How does that go?
I mean, we won by about 17,000 votes in '90. We got over 61% in '94. We would have beaten her like a drum. I mean, I always said, look, I'm like Democrats. I'm like Hallmark. Care enough to send the very best. Don't you know? Give me your very best. If it's Volpe and Feiger, if that's all you got, fine. But
Right. So you were a little disappointed with the quality. I mean, because you took down a two-time incumbent, and then they send you two guys who you know day one that they're not going to beat you.
well, I mean, I think we had a good record, so I wasn't the least bit hesitant to run on a record of I thought were pretty significant accomplishments. So and we left Michigan after 12 years a lot stronger than we found it. So
You know, it's funny you mentioned Granholm because I was thinking that too. That 98 race is her rise to the national stage. Let's say she'd shot for the big target. Let's say it's Jennifer Granholm on the ballot against John Engler going for his third term. How does that one go?
well, she wouldn't have gone anywhere because at that point she was not even the highest ranking prosecutor in the Wayne County prosecutor's office. She wasn't the county prosecutor. She worked for Ed McNamara somewhere in the
Yeah.
I mean, nobody knew who she was, and uh, I don't think her. I would concede she'd win the charm contest pretty easily if she'd run against me. There's no question about that. But uh, I do think, again, you go back to these races. It, it is about what are you willing to work on?
Mm,
What are you going to try to get done? And there's no question that we the changes we made in the property tax in Michigan if you go to Detroit alone, Detroit was 66 mills or something on property, I think, before Proposal A. That
Hmm.
dropped to 6 mills. That's why there were no. We had years in Detroit where there was not a single permit for a new home to be built in the city of Detroit.
Jesus.
Well, all of a sudden, this changed. I mean, one of the frustrations I have is we still, while we made improvements, they were so gradual. And uh, you know, the one thing I would love to have a do-over is education, because it just seems to
Mm.
me that this this remains our biggest challenge. I mean, I believe that we can teach our kids to read proficiently. I believe that we can have better results in our schools, and uh, it's it's often not the teachers. I mean, I do think teacher union leadership is sometimes, you know, awfully out of touch. The classroom teachers themselves,
Mm.
I've met so many tremendous teachers who are working their butts off. You know, they're working hard, but they're not getting the support, whether that's support from the principal in order to maintain discipline, order in the classroom, or
Hmm.
getting support for the kind of program. I mean, we we talk a lot about class size, but here's one way to look at this. I mean, if you we have schools in Michigan that are 10% proficient in reading. Now
Right.
think about that. If we're spending, and we spend more than $15,000 a student in many schools, but if you spend $15,000 on a student, if there's 20 students in the class, that class is generating $300,000 of revenue. If we have 300,000 for the kindergarten, 300,000 for the first grade,
Hmm.
300,000 for the second grade, 300,000 for the third. Now that's a total of $1.2 million over 4 years. And over that 4 years, that 20 student classroom, if there's 10% proficiency, that means two of the 20 children in that classroom are proficient readers.
It's tragic.
How can this be?
And then
How?
how do 75% of them graduate?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but then of those who go to college, only 60%. If 60% go and 60% finish, you know, we're seeing a, a lack of success there that's pretty staggering, really. But I would just say, look, the first goal ought to be just let's have every child reading proficiently, and let's decide how many we think is, because if I go into a room, if you had a group of parents here as a focus group, we had 20 parents in the room, you said how many of you are okay if your child isn't able to read? I don't
Right.
think any hands would go up. You know, and if you say, well, how many of you think after 4 years in the school, no matter what's going on at home, if there's not a single book there, if you know, I mean, there's all of these studies about how many words
Hmm.
kids hear as little kids and their vocabulary and that, but still, if let's just say that's on the low end of whatever, you know, range of words and exposure a child has, uh, you still got 4 years in the school. You've got libraries that are empty. We've got a way to. This is how you can use the entire village to help that child
Hmm.
master reading. And once they master reading, they're all walking around with an iPhone at a pretty early age. They've got the Library of Congress in their hand. They've got the world's knowledge is available to
As they
read.
used to say on those Everest College commercials, you spend all day on the phone anyway. What if you could actually read?
Yeah.
Let me ask you for a little bit of free advice, if I could. So we have three known candidates for governor in 2026. So I'll give my brief read, and then if you could just something you would tell them to take it to the next level. If because I think we can't go wrong, but I also think we're trying to get it right for next year,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So I see Eric Nesbitt, senator, state senator on the minority side. I see him as a type of Engler who needs to overcome geography, name recognition, but unlike yourself, does not need to overcome an incumbent. What do you
Right.
see?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Eric is from Southwest Michigan, really a little town of, is it Lawton? Maybe it's somewhere down Southwest. Young family, uh, smart, knows issues, pretty, I think, conversant in most of the
Oh
issues.
yeah.
So it's a question of, I mean, he's got to get in that car and travel the state and talk
Mm,
to people. My advice to all of the candidates that, and I've talked to John James, I've talked to Mike Cox, I've
mm.
talked to Tom Leonard, who's interested also and may run.
Yeah.
You know, is it you really need to get out there. I was in every one of the 83 counties 6 years in a row. Now, leading up to running for governor, I was in each of those counties 2 solid years in uh, 89 and 90.
Mm,
And then the first term, 90 through 94. And see, when you ask about these other matchups against other candidates, in my case, by 94, I'd been in these counties and I'd been out there.
right.
A lot of people had a chance to hear me and meet me, and I'd had a chance, more importantly, to hear them, listen to them, and understand how they were thinking about things. So I would say to all these candidates, getting out there is really important. I think for each of them to have 2 or 3 priorities that they will have as governor, things that,
Mm,
if you elect me, this is what I want to get done. And I've
right.
urged all of them to put education right at the top of the list, because it still is
Mm,
it's our biggest expenditure. Uh, we have a convoluted system. I would love to change it. We shouldn't be electing a state board of education and having that elected board then hiring a superintendent.
right.
Governor ought to be able to appoint the superintendent. And if we need an education, a board of education, that ought to be appointed by the governor, uh, because the governor is the one who should be held accountable.
The
I,
buck
I,
stops there.
yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
that's who people know. They know who the governor is. There isn't
Right.
anybody. I mean, we could get on the phone and start calling people. You would be hard pressed to find somebody. I can't name the state board of education right now. I don't know who's on it. I know 3 or 4 of the names, perhaps.
I'm hoping Nikki Snyder is still on it because I know her,
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
think
not
she
sure if
is, and
she's
I think a guy named Tom McMillan is on there. Tom got reelected,
Tom
uh,
McMillan. Yeah,
but
and who coincidentally happen to be the 2 Republicans. So that's who we know.
that's actually why I know them. But I mean, John Austin was on there. I don't know if he still is.
No, remember when he tried to make a run for governor or something like that? He tried to stick his neck out into real politics, and that did not go anywhere.
Okay, so and there was oh gosh, I former football player at Michigan State, and he,
Strayhorn.
yeah, Jason was on
Yeah.
there, but I think he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I'll tell you who's on there is whoever the Michigan Education Association wants, which is probably not the best way to have a state board of education put together. But so
Right.
anyway, I'd put it, if I were these candidates, the Republican candidates, but I'd urge the Democrats to do the same thing. I mean, we ought to be talking about kids, and we ought to be talking about these schools.
Mm.
I think that's really important. Uh, the second one, as I think you mentioned it before, and I was talking a little bit about, but work. I mean, we need to get back to work. Everybody's
Yeah.
we need to help people get into the workforce, and if they're not able to get in the workforce because they don't have the skills, then we need to make damn sure they get the skills. So education and work, and then the third probably is the competitiveness of the state. I mean, how do we attract jobs? An idea that I've been given by a couple of business leaders who said, look, you can give a lot of subsidies to companies,
Right.
but today the companies are so uh, hungry for talent that
Mm-hmm.
maybe if we subsidize that engineer coming out of the engineering school, whether it's at you know Michigan or Michigan State or any other school, uh, and help keep that talent in the state, that'll actually do more to attract companies and their investment than trying to give the company the money. Because
And so we have so many of these companies, even the ones who do get the money, the Fords and the GMs, hiring what could be a new fleet of recent college graduates or just really talented people from Michigan, and instead you're hiring H-1Bs. And so I don't know why we've decided to do this, but we shipped a lot of our jobs away, and then we decided to import other labor as if our workers had not been undercut enough.
yeah, and that obviously is something that's front and center on President Trump's mind. I mean, for the whole country. But let's say he has some success in trying to I mean, certainly there seem to be some pretty significant announcements that have been made about investments are going to happen, but those investments could go anywhere. Can Michigan attract some of those? What's that take? Are we competitive? And one of the ways we get competitive is we have the workforce. This is again a Mike Rowe statistic, but I thought it was really an important one. He said for every skilled trade person, if you hired 2, they're replacing 5 that are retiring because the age of our workforce is such.
Right.
The boomers are heading over the hills here.
It's the way we used to talk about Social Security. There's not enough payers into the system. And so there's not enough like workers in the pipeline.
Right. So, I mean, those are the kinds of issues. I mean, if you've got in your future podcasts, you're talking to these candidates. I mean, day one, I mean, what are the 3 priorities you're going to have, and how are you going to do it? You know, who is, because again, a governor can't. You know, this is, I think, one of the challenges President Trump sometimes has when he has a pretty good idea, but depending on who he hands it to, it may or may not be executed effectively.
Right.
And that's not just his issue. I mean, he happens to be the president now, so it's his issue today, but it was certainly there for a Biden, for a Bush, for
personnel.
People matter.
It really is a problem. And quality people who actually support what you're doing and are trusted enough by other people who you need to buy into your agenda. There's so few of them. One of the
interesting things that I always point to people, it's not something that they pay much. There is no press anymore, so to speak, to cover what goes on in Lansing. I mean, unless you're able to afford a subscription to Gong or Mirrors, which are 2 like legislative newsletters, if you will, that cover what goes on here.
Which state taxpayers pay for, but only a few people get to use. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
you can't read the Detroit papers and have any sense of what's really going on in Lansing.
No.
I mean,
was it always that way? Was it always that way, or is that new?
No. I mean, when I started years ago, I mean, there were bureaus, first of all, for the free press, for the news. For the regional papers, they were called booth newspapers. They were in Grand Rapids, Saginaw, Jackson, Ann Arbor. So they had a bureau. The Lansing State Journal, which was in Lansing, they had their own bureau. There was an AP bureau. Today, there's like one AP reporter trying to cover not just the legislature, but the judiciary, the executive, and, oh, by the way, because you're an AP reporter in Lansing, you have to cover things going on out in the community. It's ridiculous. I mean, there's no inches set aside in these papers to cover what's going on in Lansing. And so, and the term limits destroyed the institutional memory by and large. So old ideas that were bad then can come back as a new idea. They're just as bad, but nobody's there to sort of remind or ask, well, wait a minute, that failed 3 times already in the past, was rejected. Why do you think what's changed that makes you think that just because you're bringing it forward that it's better than it was? And so, I mean, that is, I mean, I don't want to sound just cranky about that, but I mean, I do think the coverage is not what it used to be. And that hurts on accountability. I mean, in the old days, I mean, you go back to the point I made almost at the beginning of our conversation. If you didn't call a special election that was supposed to be called because you had a vacant seat, you'd have had editorials in all these papers.
Yes.
None of these papers first of all, many of the papers don't exist at all. If they do exist, they don't write editorials. They feed us, those papers they'll put 2 pages of sort of national wire service copy in there. Who needs that from them? Because you can see that you can see on television, or you can get
my slogan for this show is make news local again. And exactly. when I look back at the 90s, to do some of the research, I was struck by, go on newspapers.com and Kalamazoo Gazette, the Lansing State Journal, the Sit-Pat in Jackson. You have real local papers, and in a lot of cases, the ones that are MLive or both MLive and Gannett, You have these ghost newsrooms now where you have one person covering an entire community. And so what happens when that happens and you don't have enough people to write the news? What happens is you don't get news anymore. What
Right.
you get is one of two things. You get either coverage. These people said this thing, and why does the story exist? To fill pages. Or you get narratives. And that's what I feel has mainly happened in Lansing. Think about the class size investigation at Detroit News. That was not some reporter rolling a ball up the hill and finding the truth at the end of it. That was the unions, aligned lawmakers saying, hey, if you start writing about this, I'm going to have a plan about it. And then next thing you know, everyone's talking about class size. It was plain as day to me. And it's just amazing to hear someone else see these things and talk about it.
Well, think about class size for a moment. I mean, here's a kid. I went to a small rural school up in central Michigan, but there were only 42 kids in the class at the time. This was a lot of years ago, but it's not. They're bigger today, but not huge. And in fact, high schools are losing enrollment too because demographics. There aren't as many kids.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, but there are many more administrators. Nobody really writes about how many administrators today versus
Right.
you had.
Mm.
We got a smaller school, more administrators versus the larger school in the past with fewer. But that aside, what I think, is this: I went from Beale City High School to Michigan State University. Suddenly, I'm in a class that has more kids than my school had, than my high school had.
Right.
So you're telling me that the class size was really important in the 12th grade or the 11th grade versus maybe the class size should be a lot smaller in the first grade and the second grade,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be bigger in these higher grades. In other words, and I think the other thing that's going to happen in education, not only do we have the most important issue is the quality issue, but they've got a financial problem coming. I mean, it's really already here, sort of. Um, that there was so much COVID money that went out, and that COVID money got spent, and a lot of it got baked into the operating costs of these schools.
They hired people knowing that the money was temporary and thinking they were going to play chicken with Lansing and say, now that people expect this higher COVID money standard, you can't go back on it.
James,
Yeah, we can.
you've nailed it, James. That is exactly the problem they've got. And so I think you're going to have to do things like, I'll give you an example, something we did in the 90s. Uh, I mentioned our Family Independence Agency. These were the old county social service offices. We had a director in every county.
Mm.
Well, that meant Oakland County had a director, but so did Isabella County and Mecosta County and Gratiot County up central Michigan. I could take 5 counties up there, and they weren't close to the size of Kent County or Oakland County or Macomb County.
Right.
So he said, why do we have to have a director in each of these counties? Can't we have one director and give them several counties?
Regions, yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, that's what we did. That saved us a lot of overhead, and then that money could then make sure we had enough people out there doing, child protective services work, which is one of the hardest, toughest jobs we've got in government. Those are miserable jobs, and the decisions are so impactful. I mean, they literally are either saving lives or putting life at risk if they don't make the right decision. I mean, these are hard jobs and they're burnout jobs. So anyway, I mean, you're going to have to in schools. I think Isabella County is a good example. That's my home county. There's 3 schools there. I'm not for forced consolidation. Let's not get into fights about mascots. But do we really need to have 3 superintendents for 3 schools, or could one handle the schools? Do we need to have assistant or associate superintendents for curriculum in each of those? Could those not be done on a broader basis? I mean, you could run the books for probably all the schools in Michigan off of one server in Lansing if you wanted to. You
And
certainly
then you have
don't need to have.
intermediate school districts at the county level. What do they do?
Yeah.
Who can honestly tell me how an intermediate school district has affected the education of their kid's life? It hasn't happened.
Dan DeGrow, who was an outstanding Senate leader and Senate education expert, after he left the legislature, actually was the superintendent of the St. Clair County Intermediate School District. Dan was very creative in doing all kinds of services for the school districts that were in his area. There was multiple. He'd be a great guest to just talk about
Mm,
how you could talk about uh, what can you do to consolidate what I call overhead costs so that you have more money available for the teacher and the student. I mean,
absolutely.
the school ought to be focused on the resource. It's the teacher and the students, and the money that goes there. So what could be done to have more transparency about the budgets? I mean, I don't know if school boards even understand this very effectively. I mean, I don't know if they ask questions about this, but
Mm.
that's what there ought to be, is a focus on who can drive the overhead costs down so we can put more into the classroom. And now you're going to have to drive the overhead costs down just to have the school district survive because of the costs that they baked in.
Yeah, I remember Kalkaska having to close school early, I think in '94,
That was
ran out of money.
that was actually way back before Proposal A. You're exactly right.
Mm. John, you've been more than generous with your time. We'll get you out of here on this one. Uh, our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, you know, in 2020, she's angling for vice president so clearly with her acting and her performances and doing everything she could that would help Biden, even holding off on COVID reaching Michigan so Biden could win the primary. Didn't happen. George Floyd died. And that changed the dynamic there for the Democrats. Then 2024, angling to replace Biden, was passed over without any real process. Since then, her only notable moments are a Dorito communion and hiding her face in the Oval Office. What do you make? You are a political wizard. What do you make as a politician, as a man, as a fellow human? What do you make of the Whitmer implosion? And is this it? Is this the end of Big Gretch?
I think so. I mean, I think she'll go on. She'll leave office in 26 and maybe be on a couple of nice board appointments. I mean, I think she's viewed, I think, sort of more broadly as more moderate than in fact her policies are and the way she's
Right.
governed. But her casting of herself, she clearly moved far to the progressive side of the house when she was, as you say, auditioning. I described it as the most expensive audition we've ever seen for a place on
Man,
a national ticket,
it really
because she
was.
kept doing all of these things that were appealing to donors on the donor base on East and West Coast. I mean, she spent
Mm-hmm.
a lot of her time out there. Now she's doing a lot of international travel, which I think just, maybe gives her additional experience for the eventually being on a corporate board that she wants to be on. So that she's getting a little more exposure that way. So I would think that's what she'll do. I don't actually even, I would actually be surprised if she were, attempting to run for president.
That's what I said. I believe that the way she's dressing, I mean, a lot of times when you see her, she's dressed actually like a Michigan pothole, perhaps to remind people that she has not fixed the roads. When you look at the dress, when you look at the demeanor, when you look at someone who doesn't want to be running mate if you think that Kamala Harris was going to win, right? You look at all these weird behaviors, canceling on Meet the Press. I think the ambition is gone, and I think the light is gone out of her eyes. I think she realizes what you see, that this is it.
You know, I just don't think the record. I mean, it. I mean, it's. What would you say is her singular achievement as governor? I mean, I would have looked back and talked about Proposal A or some of the things we did in trying to reform the welfare system. Uh, we took the state administrative code from 3 volumes down to 2. We
Mm,
did a lot of reorganization of things. But you say, well, what is she? What what's the most important accomplishment that she's got? You put it up on the wall.
right.
What's really made a difference?
There isn't one.
No, I mean, she's handed out massive amounts of money to corporations through her economic development programming, I guess. But is that
Nothing to show for it. She got some headlines.
no, not really. So there's that. I mean, the COVID thing didn't work. I mean, that's a big negative. education performance is a big negative. Cost of government soared because she's, they really haven't. Michigan has lent itself. She hasn't been able to raise taxes, which is a good thing. I mean, that would have been a bad thing if she'd been able to do that.
Right.
But I just don't. I just don't. I don't know. I don't see the record there to say, I did this in Michigan and now I want to do it nationally.
Yes.
What is what is
What is that?
that?
What?
What's in that speech?
Right. Absolutely. John, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Governor Engler, three-time governor, the governor of my youth when Michigan was, when they say make Michigan great again, I'd be talking about those years.
When I was
So,
at Michigan State for that year, I'd run into these students on campus and they'd say, "Well, I think my grandfather knew you." That's which is about right. I mean, so I tell people, look, I'm just a guy from the last century. So, but I do care about Michigan. I care deeply about the state and our people, and you won't find a better state with nicer people and hardworking, tough, resilient people. But hey, let's get a government on their side.
yeah. Yeah. Let's save our state.